Welcome to this council call on the outcome of the Polish presidential elections. We had called it the topic of the call a pivotal choice. And I believe we had no real idea what we were talking about, in the sense that this may indeed be a really pivotal choice for the whole of Europe. All of us were hoping probably that this would go, that this election would go differently. Yet we knew that the risk was there, that this election is going to change the trajectory of Poland and its trajectory in Europe, within Europe. So this is, I believe, the focus we will try to take in this conversation. And we have an all-star cast here. We have Piotr Buras, the head of our Warsaw office, whom you all know, Karolina Wigura from the University of Warsaw, and Bawdzina Śmieciński from the New Community Foundation. I'm very grateful to all of you that you're here today, because I know you have probably done, you had a long night, and you have probably done quite a lot of discussions already today. But this emergency call is for the benefit of all of our council members across Europe. And because of that, we will maybe start by asking what actually happened. Piotr, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Vesela, and very well welcome from Warsaw to all of us, all of you. And let me perhaps, I think probably everybody knows the results and roughly the two candidates who took part in this presidential race. I will probably try to very briefly answer the question why it happened. I mean, why Trzaskowski lost? Because I think this is probably something which people ask themselves very often today. So I think there were, in a nutshell, three reasons for that. The first reason was quite a bad record of the Tusk government. The people in Poland are disappointed with this government on both sides. I mean, the voters of the opposition for obvious reasons, but also the voters of the ruling coalition who brought this government into power in October 2023 are not really satisfied with its record, for, I think, honestly, for quite good reasons. It is obvious that the veto policy by Andrzej Duda prevented this government from a number of initiatives or from passing legislation, or actually from this legislation getting into force. But the fact is also that Andrzej Duda was a good excuse for this coalition not to do many things which the government or the coalition partners promised to the voters in October 2023 and later. So what was perceived as a certain inactivity of this government, the fact that on many important issues the legislation was not even passed in the parliament and was not put forward to the president for signature, that created a lot of discontent and dissatisfaction among the voters. And the fact that Trzaskowski did not manage in the end to mobilize the voters who supported this coalition in 2023 was the first important reason for him losing this election. I think the second important reason was that, especially in the last few weeks of the campaign, the focus of Trzaskowski's campaign was on discrediting basically his competitor, Karol Nawrocki, for his very dubious, to put it mildly, past, for his biography, for lots of things which he was, for very good reasons, heavily criticized also in the media. But the overall assumption is, I think, that this negative campaign was vastly overused. And so basically there is an analogy to the US, and so basically Trump was also elected despite of all the accusations and which were rightly put against him. And Nawrocki basically experienced the same fate. Perhaps one can even say that in some segments of the electorate, this very, as I do believe, legitimate criticism and very tough criticism about him, perhaps in some segments it really even helped consolidate his electorate rather than discourage people from voting for him. And then the last point is, I think that there was so that Trzaskowski, unlike Nawrocki, was not a very did not have a very straightforward image or very clear, did not represent a very clear agenda. He was, Nawrocki, everybody knew what he stood for, very strong nationalist, anti-EU positions, anti-migration, anti-green agenda, and so on and so forth, while Trzaskowski is well known in Poland for his rather left liberal progressive views. And in this campaign, he tried to appeal also to the centrist or rather even right-wing voters, adopting narratives and positions which obviously were not his, and which I think he himself felt rather uncomfortable. And so that was the credibility problem of Trzaskowski, that for a number of voters he was not credible, and he was not credible either for the progressives nor for the right-wing voters. So I think these are three reasons. Of course, if one need to underline that, there were 400,000 people more who voted for Nawrocki than for Trzaskowski. So it could be easily a completely different outcome. And we would talk here about also different reasons for a different outcome. But I think, seen from this perspective, what we know today, from where the things stand, I think these are, in my understanding, the three reasons which were decisive for the outcome of this election.
Karolina, we have read quite a number of analysis in the last couple of hours of people basically saying that this is a big hit for Polish democracy. From what Piotr just told us, it seems more the defeat of a specific electoral strategy rather than defeat for the system as such. What would you think? What would you say?
Thank you, Vesela. This is a great question. I would basically like to draw three arguments concerning Polish democracy and how it's affected, how it might be affected by the victory of Karol Nawrocki. Point number one, which probably answers your question most, is what I would call the end of dreams of an easy liberal reform, or an easy return to the liberal democratic status quo. So there was this plan and this strategy that was adopted by the government, namely that first the the government would mostly rule with executive decisions because signing legal bills reforming the rule of law was rather impossible under President Duda, and then change the president and attempt to organize a full scale liberal reform. Well, we see that this strategy was not successful. This will not happen. And one of the consequences of this new president, Karol Nawrocki, might be, doesn't have to be, but might be, that if there is a conflict around the new budget for 2026 and the president doesn't sign the budget in December 2025, we might have early parliamentary election, and it might mean that Donald Tusk loses the post of Prime Minister of Poland. It might be a probable coalition of Peace Party with the Konfederacja Party, which is this far right-wing party. So to answer briefly, it is not the end of Polish democracy. I think Polish democracy is far from the end, but it's surely the end of dreams of an easy return to the status quo from before 2015. So this is point number one. Point number two is that probably what we are dealing with here is Poland much more leaning towards the MAGA project and not any kind of reform of liberal democracy. So in the long list of states where we have, for example, Slovakia, USA, Romania, Canada, and Australia, Poland would rather join the first two countries, Slovakia and the USA, in the overall direction of its politics, or at least a strong divide between the liberal democratic and national populist forces. So this would be point number two. A very good news for Mr. Trump in Washington, I believe.
But you say Slovakia and the US, but you don't say Hungary.
Yes, I don't say Hungary, and that's because Hungary didn't actually have in the past 10 to 15 years any liberal intermezzo. So any liberal interlude. What USA had was Joe Biden and his administration and the failed attempt to go back to liberal democracy. What Slovakia had was Zuzana Čaputová, again, a failed attempt to restore liberal democracy for good. And now it seems as if the Polish liberal interlude was seriously endangered. Not ended yet, but seriously under threat. So this was point number two. Point number three, I do believe what we have been observing here on the Polish example is also a dynamic that has been visible very much in the recent American election, in the recent Brazilian election, and for example, in some of the European countries, like, for example, the German election in February. Namely, we are observing a longer and more complicated shift from what the French-American political scientist Bernard Manin called audience democracy to something that is called today digital democracy. So from audience democracy with radio and television being the dominant media, with media experts, with politicians that are focusing on building their parties and focusing on opinion polls, you have a shift into democracy which is based on social media, which is based on leaders not actually trying to only to mobilize their parties, but actually they're trying to serve on a digital crowd that is being created by this rather chaotic dynamic of the social media. So Poland is surely one of the examples of that. And Piotr rightly said that the difference between the two candidates is really small. But surely what we are observing here is the fact that Mr. Nawrocki, perhaps PiS, were to some extent better in mobilizing the voters of the digital crowd, or digital swarm, as I like to call it, to go and vote for their candidate and against the other candidate. And this is something that we will be observing in many, many other European countries and also countries throughout the world in the coming years. Because, and this is my last sentence, what we are dealing here is actually not a challenge to either have populism or to combat populism and restore liberal democracy. With the social media and new technologies, it rather looks as if we were on a path either to lose democracy as a political system or restore it, reform it in the era of the new media.
So how to reinvent democracy? Virginia, I think the question to you would be much more about how you see Polish society changed and how this result reflects the changes in Polish society, but also whether you share this possibility that Karolina mentioned to see a government crisis and possible early elections in 26.
Thank you, Vessela. I was a bit frightened by your initial idea to ask me about how to reform democracy. Couldn't answer that straight away. But in terms of the immediate political outcome, as you might know, the Prime Minister has announced an important conference for 8 p.m. today. And there are different scenarios as to that. He might be announcing a government reshuffle, which is more or less sure. He will probably also announce a vote of confidence in order to kind of reassure his own electorate, but also check the ranks of his MPs and see whether the coalition is still standing or not. So this is what he's planning in the short term. There is some prospect for an early election, but I think it's more probable for that to happen if Mr. Nawrocki would somehow, through his measures and presidential authority, really be able to block the budget. I don't think Mr. Tusk himself is in the position to call an early election. That would be very detrimental to his government right now, to his personal standing as prime minister, because that would open also the field to speculation whether he should remain in the post. And finally, there are bad experiences, especially for Mr. Kaczynski, who has called an early election back, I believe, in 2007 and actually lost it. So in terms of government stability, I would be reluctant to make judgments right now. We need to see what the coalition partners are saying, whether there will be demands for Tusk to step down from the other coalition partners, how Mr. Nawrocki will settle into the office, which will happen only in August, so we still have some time there. For sure, it is clear that the intention of Mr. Kaczynski, the political partisan intention, was to unseat Mr. Tusk in the midterm. This is why he put such a challenger in front of Mr. Trzaskowski. It is a little bit less about ideology. It was more about retaining control over the legislative process, the capacity to block all legislation from the government and kind of grind this current government of Mr. Tusk to a halt, so he becomes essentially a lame duck government. And due to the fact that that cabinet will not be very effective over the next 2 years, they will be easy prey in elections down 2027. Perhaps that election will come earlier. In terms of your question on society, the work that we are doing at the New Community Foundation is focused on polarization, on looking for sources of polarization and devising methods and means to actually reduce that tension in countries. Poland happens to be the second most polarized country in the EU after Hungary, and that election result is also a testament to that. Obviously, all binary choices, when you get two candidates, that they very often end with a very slim margin. But what you're seeing, if you take apart the support, you are going to see supporters of Mr. Trzaskowski behind him, but also supporters of two left-leaning candidates who didn't make it into the second round, so Mrs. Biejat and Mr. Zandberg. So we have a lot of younger voters going to towards the left. And finally, we see the demise of Szymon Hołownia, the ultra-centrist candidate, who won spectacularly a third place in the previous presidential election cycle. So on the one side, you see a liberal camp, which is composed of the center, center-right, and two left parties. And on the right wing, behind Mr. Nawrocki, you see PIS, but you also see supporters of Mr. Mencen, which is the Nationalist Party, and Mr. Braun, which is the ultra-nationalist hard-right party with anti-Semitic overtones. So we are seeing, and those two candidates who respectively took third and fourth place in the first round of the presidential election 2 weeks ago, their result was a big surprise for us as political analysts and the citizens also. We knew Mr. Mencen is going to be somewhere above 10. We didn't expect him to be at 15. We certainly didn't expect Mr. Braun to come in fourth, ahead of all the left candidates. So we are seeing, in terms of society, we are seeing a shift towards the right, which is very much an anti-system right. Those are right-wing or radicalized right-wing voters who are opposed to liberal policies, to pro-European policies, who are very much opposed to Mr. Tusk, whom they see as an incarnation of the old political garb, of somebody who deals with the West, who potentially could let more immigration into the country. So what I would say is that we are essentially reaping the results of a stagnant political system. Some people call it a duopoly between Mr. Kaczynski and Mr. Tusk. It is in fact a system where you already by each election you see the same faces, and though Kaczynski is the same one, he had a new candidate in the person of Mr. Nawrocki. So there was more kind of new energy for right-wing voters, personalized by Mr. Nawrocki, and Trzaskowski was somebody who already lost one presidential election, who was put forward once again, and often was suspected by right-wing voters to be a simple executor of Mr. Tusk's will. It was also clear in the campaign that Tusk was arguing we need this presidency in order to be able to have agency and to push the reforms to reinstate rule of law, whereas Kaczynski was arguing against that, saying we don't want a monopoly of power in the hands of Mr. Tusk. So it's very much about also about personal sympathies, trust and distrust towards political leaders. It turns out Mr. Tusk is distrusted to a greater extent than Mr. Kaczynski, if we judge the situation by those election results, because both candidates were very close to their respective leaders. And in terms of society, this election is a confirmation that polls are very, very divided, that affective polarization is actually equally, if not more important than pure ideological polarization. By ideological, we mean different rational choices about whom we support, which policies we liked and we support. Affective being about the attitude that we have, the attitude of distrust, to some extent also hate. We have done polling right before the first round of election, which we haven't published yet, where the initial results essentially show that there is more hatred and more distrust from liberal voters towards conservative voters than in the other direction. So that there's work definitely done to be among the work to be done among the political class on the liberal side, but plenty of soul searching also among the broader votership of the big cities, the liberally minded Poles, who have to some extent left behind those who were less better off, worse off over the past 30 years.
So if there is indeed this shift to the right, there would be expectations also towards the new president, right? That there is a visible shift in the trajectory of Poland. So, Piotr, Polish president cannot have that many levers to execute this change of trajectory. And in a way, we are currently also in that situation of cohabitation, right? Between Mr. Tusk and President Duda. What do you think Nawrocki would or could change, and especially in the European trajectory of Poland, which is of interest, I guess, to our audience? Our colleague Marta Prokwitz did a very nice piece about the possible changes in Polish foreign policy, and I will ask my colleagues to maybe post it here in the chat. But what is your take on the freedom of maneuver, so to say, of the new president?
You know, I think it is indeed important to underline that we don't have a presidential system in Poland. It's a parliamentary democracy, so the president does not shape policies, including foreign and European policy, because actually he doesn't have much of a say in these realms. But this is not how the power of the president is being executed. I think the president can talk. The president has his authority, and he can also veto legislation. So these are two basically most important instruments of his power. And I think the main or the most important mission of Karol Nawrocki in the office will be to pave the way for the PIS back to power in 2027. And he will probably see himself not just as a representative of the Law and Justice Party, who he technically is not, because as far as I know, he's not even a party member. And he was presenting himself as a civic candidate, not a party candidate. But he will consider himself to be a representative of the whole right, and he will claim to be the leader of the whole right, including probably the far right and the brown and all these various currents of the current Polish right. And so I think the one thing is that that when it comes to his policy, he will be very focused on undermining the government and making life as hard as possible for Tusk and for his coalition. When it comes to European EU policy or more broadly foreign policy, as I said, I mean there is no immediate result of this election because, of course, the president is not in charge of the EU policy. But I think what needs to be pointed to is the fact that we will have a completely different political dynamic and completely different political constellation in this situation. Because you are right, we've already had cohabitation between the president supporting the opposition, the PIS party, and Tusk. But that was it. But the politically, from the political point of view, over the last 1.5 years, we had a outgoing president and a government with a very strong democratic mandate. And that's very strong democratic legitimacy. After this election, we have a president coming from the opposition, representing the opposition with a very strong democratic mandate, and the government whose legitimacy is being very much put in question. Of course, the government still has a majority in the parliament. It still has can basically rule and act, but politically, of course, it is close to being or becoming a lame duck. And without this strong democratic legitimacy, which has also been, I think, Donald Tusk's main foreign policy asset. I mean, his reputation in Europe, in the world, was very much based on this narrative, which was very true and very powerful, about a prime minister, politician, first one who reversed this populist trend in Europe, who managed to win an election against populists and restore liberal democracy. And now this foundation of Donald Tusk's power and influence is kind of gone. I mean, he cannot, any longer basically draw upon this resource. So I think that what this election will change is that the room of maneuver in European and foreign policy of Donald Tusk will be even smaller than it was before this election. Tusk was not known for very ambitious, foreign and European policy agenda. And everybody, or many, including us, I think, expected Poland to become a more ambitious and more active player, and more kind of maybe even pro-European and progressive after this election. Once, all these constraints related to the electoral cycle would be gone, and it will not materialize. I mean, there will be many EU and foreign policy issues will become a very, very controversial and dividing topics in the domestic political context. That refers to the relationship with the US, that refers to Ukraine, and that refers also to the EU defense policy, which has been an important trading mark of Tusk's government, and evoked a lot of criticism among the PIS politicians. And Tusk has been criticized by Nawrocki, by Kaczynski, by others, for undermining allegedly the transatlantic ties by investing too much in our relationship with European partners, by investing into the European defense. And so I think this is the more kind of fundamental change which will happen. But I think in the end, the most important risk for Europe involved in this election is that it will indeed, as Karolina laid it out, change the dynamic in the Polish politics towards a return of a populist or far-right even government at some point in time, perhaps even sooner rather than later, because it's very difficult to see, the Tusk government to remain in power for 2.5 years, or another government, maybe not even led by Tusk, but formed by this democratic coalition for 2.5 years without basically being able to deliver on any of its promises, and able to carry out any of its projects. So I think this specter of the right-wing populism coming back to power in Poland, I think this is probably the most dangerous scenario for Europe, much more than the fact that Poland will be less active or less ambitious, which probably Europe can somehow live with.
Thank you. There are a number of questions in the Q&A box, if you want to take a look. But Karolina, maybe two which are more concretely directed to you. One was how you would see this reform of the democratic system and institutions happen. The lack of legitimacy that Piotr was talking about, how that can be compensated. Is there still a kind of a constructive scenario under which the Tusk government assumes a leading role for Poland, despite all of those constraints in the furthering of European integration. I would maybe add also the issue on migration, if you want to also take that. And then there are a number of questions that we can then consider with Virginia later. But Karolina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vessela. As for the question about democracy, I do believe that many of us, as we speak or listen today, many of us have read the book by a great Irish political science, Ruling the Void. So this is the book by Peter Mayer. His argument basically is that with the emergence of new type of political parties in the 20th century, we have observed a growing role of opinion polls and identity issues, because the political leaders have been looking for sources of cleavages that would be interesting for their electorates. So they were concentrating more and more on their identity politics. At the same time, Mayer argues the traditional cleavages coming from the class source that were in the beginning the source of birth of political parties. They have been they decreased, because we all live much more similarly to each other than we lived 100 years ago. So the argument of Mayer is that this basically leaves a void in democracy and is a serious challenge. However, the book I'm talking about is from the beginning of 2010s. Mayer was not able to see the current developments because he passed away, and the actual book is actually a collection of essays gathered by his students. But what we observe today is that there is no void. The role of the political parties have been taken by internet groups, people organizing themselves on the internet or digital swarm, as I called it before. And this poses a serious challenge to democracy. This poses a serious challenge to political leadership. And I do believe that the first thing we would have to do in order to really tackle the question is to agree that what we are observing is something deeper than only an analogy to what happened 100 years ago. It is something deeper than only a challenge between two types of political style or two types of attitude to political regime or the constitution or whatever. This is probably the next great shift of technology, and shifts in technology always contributed to turbulences and revolutions. So in order to answer the very practical question that you answered, that you asked, Vessela, I do believe that we really have to intellectually delve deeper and understand the nature of change, because then we have so many practical, detailed questions. Like, for example, okay, so if we know that the populist parties are basically very good at mobilizing the digital swarm, but they use conspiratory theories, for example. Should liberals also do it, or should rather not? Well, I don't think they should, but then what do they do in order to really connect to their voters and to mobilize them? So as you can see, I basically see a lot of deep intellectual questions here concerning the nature of democracy, concerning the nature of political parties, concerning the nature of political leadership, and what interests me also the most always is political emotions and how to mobilize them, how to articulate them. So perhaps this is not a very long answer to your very deep question, just to allow for others still to have the floor.
Is migration one of those issues? Carolina.
I do believe that migration is one of the most important topics right now. We can see it both in opinion polls and in political dynamic. We could see it in the parliamentary campaign in the US, in Poland, and in Germany, if you like, migration was one of the core subjects. So it is not the sole subject. It is all happening in a context of a deeper societal angst connected with change, connected with the chances and the economy and so on. But yes, it's obviously one of the issues.
And probably we will see, I guess, more kind of restrictive policy of the part of the Polish government, especially on migration. The
yes,
question...
but show me a European government that would now say, let's just invite the migrants because this is the this is the promise of the better future, right?
Well,
so are the times.
That's what the Spanish government says.
Oh, that's right. So at least there is one.
There is a question whether the elections could be annulled. Also a question about the urban-rural divide. And maybe if you can also, Virginia, talk a little bit also about the generational divide. You mentioned it in your initial remarks. So yes, and any of the other questions that you liked and want to tackle.
Yeah, the answer to the question on annulation is a no. The results have been declared. There is a difference of more than 500,000 votes. So even if there will be probably some electoral protests, but no way. That's the final election. Mr. Nawrocki is going to be Poland's president for the next 5 years. In terms of the rural-urban divide, it has played a major issue. Actually, the current election has exacerbated what we have seen before. That generally Platforma is being, formerly Platforma, Koalicja Obywatelska, the Tusk party, is being chosen, is majoritarian in big cities, and in the current election also it were the big cities that voted for Trzaskowski, although it is estimated there has been some unused potential in mid-sized cities, so that Trzaskowski concentrated too much on the big city elites, and that the rural areas, especially among farmers who are afraid of the Green Deal and the consequences for their agricultural production, have voted by and large for Mr. Nawrocki. Poles living abroad could have probably voted in larger numbers for Mr. Trzaskowski than they actually had. So that's in terms of urban-rural divide. We also are seeing again a little bit of that division map of Poland from the 19th century. The eastern provinces, which are poorer and more agrarian, are largely voting Nawrocki, whereas Trzaskowski has won more in the west. You mentioned generational divides, and they are important, but they are also important in terms of gender. We are seeing more younger male voters voting for Nawrocki, which are probably people who have voted for Mencen, the young upstart right-wing candidate, and some older people also for the kind of protest vote for Braun. We are also seeing a lot of young people voting for the left-leaning candidates, but they have also transferred their votes to Trzaskowski. So yes, we are seeing a shift, but we are still in the flows, so to say, of that divide between the conservative part of the political system and the liberal part, the one that is pro-European and perhaps more technocratically oriented, and the one which is more sovereignist, nationalist, and ready to accept authoritarian rule in some, disguised as democracy, one way or another. I wouldn't say there's a question on MAGA. I wouldn't say that Kristi Noem's visit had so much impact on the election. It wasn't reported to a huge extent. In terms of European autonomy in defense matters, I don't think that Mr. Nawrocki will be a great supporter of that. I actually think he will pretty soon get a visit in the White House and will be touted as Europe's new leader and, you know, the symbol of the advent of make Europe great again in Europe. So I think, and he'll gladly accept that title from Mr. Trump. Somebody asked about whether it's really a difference since Nawrocki is essentially from the same camp as Duda, the outgoing president. Yes, he is, but he comes with a new, fresh mandate. He comes in a situation where PIS is not holding the government. He will be much more radical. That's why they chose somebody who is a former boxer and has experience in street fighting, because he promises to be a much kind of gloves-off politician. There might be spats about who is representing Poland in councils, something we have already had a few years back. He'll probably pursue his own narrative when talking to Mr. Trump or Mr. Macron, because the presidential level is being represented by the president. He will try to impose his will on the army structures, because he is in control of the nominations of the generals. And he will block probably virtually all legislation coming from the government. So on the surface, not much changes, but in the technicalities of Polish politics, everything will change, because also the conditions for the current government and for the majority are changing. And there will be also attempts on part of Mr. Kaczynski to tease out individual MPs from the current coalition, especially from the ruling party PSL and from Mr. Hołownia, in order to bring down the current coalition earlier. I know that sounds all very dramatic. We don't want to be, you know, too pessimistic about it, but it's definitely a game-changing situation. And there is not much of a silver lining to it, aside from the fact that turnout has been very high and that you can say that Polish voters are not willing to cast their votes in elections. The problem is the kind of political offer they are getting from their parties. And if you would ask me what you asked initially, what the Liberals could do, well, they probably would need to exchange their leadership and rethink how they do politics. And my key line would be the kind of philosophical reason for failure is individualism instead of communitarian thinking. You can accuse PIS of plenty of things. And yes, it is a kind of one-person-led party, but in other respects, they are very good at exchanging people, putting forward a candidate who will suit the electorate, and building a political narrative which is about community and taking care of people. Whereas the liberals in Poland are, as liberals are, very much concentrated on the well-being of the individual career, individual well-being, individual and social and economic advancement. And I think this is something also that Trzaskowski personalized, being very successful as a former professor, as a former minister, multilingual as he is. All those things which would play into his hands in a mature Western democracy actually were a burden to him, which is sad, but politically true, as we see from the results.
Thank you very much, because this is a nice summary, I think, of the symbolic side of this victory. We will still maybe try once more to dig into the also into the practical effects on the European front. And Piotr, there is a question on the rule of law, how this is going to affect the rule of law reforms, if you would like to address that. And maybe I would like to add a question on the Ukrainian migrants, because migration in Poland has a very clear kind of connotation vis-a-vis Ukraine, but also what do you think all of that would mean for enlargement? Because clearly Poland's voice is critical on enlargement?
Yeah, so, on the rule of law, it's quite, unfortunately, quite easy to answer the question. So basically, there is the whole rule of law agenda is over. There is no way Nawrocki will sign off on any legislation which would try to restore the rule of law in the way how the Tusk government has designed it. So there are some already bill proposals prepared. Some of them are more advanced, others less advanced, but none of them will be passed. I mean, they probably we will see. Maybe they will be passed in the parliament, but they will not signed off by the president. I think that this is one of the most important points of conflict between the government and the future president. On Ukraine in general, I think the sentiment in Poland towards Ukraine and the Ukrainians has worsened over the last months and years. So this is not by accident that Nawrocki jumped on this anti-Ukrainian, I would say, partly at least, rhetoric in the campaign. For example, excluding, ruling out, NATO, Ukraine's NATO accession, which is really like crossing a red line in the Polish political discourse. This is, until very recently, that was a part of the Polish raison d'etat, and everybody would have agreed upon that this is what the Polish security hinges on. But this is new, and what is also new is the fact, Virginians talked about it, that the far right parties candidates gathered more than 20%, and the far right, I mean Manson and Brown, they are really anti-Ukraine, and they have always been. So even they would have even criticized, Duda and the PIS for the governments led by Morawiecki for its pro-European position when the war started. So now there is a competition on the right between the right-wing national conservative PIS party and the far-right party or parties, and they will compete basically for the same electorate and for the leadership of the Polish right. And Ukraine will be one of the key topics. And I have no doubts that there will be a lot of backlash in the Polish politics, especially on the right, against Ukraine's integration also with the EU, perhaps even more than with NATO, because this is not on the table, while the Ukraine's integration with the EU will have to proceed, and there will be more. For example, we will start talks about the new trade arrangements with Ukraine after the ATMs have expired or will have expired on the 6th of June. So I think that will be one of the most divisive issues, and the problem is that, of course, the government will also try to somehow take this new political context into account, and so this is what I meant with this shrinking room of maneuver in the Tusk government's foreign European policy.
One last question, and I think we should close after that. If you would have to compare Mr. Nawrocki and his future presidency to one of the other European parties, whom you think he would be closest to, what would be kind of your first instinct? Who would be his allies in Europe? Let's put it this way.
Rassemblement, whatever, how it is called by now. Marine Le Pen.
Karolina?
Biden, because Nawrocki is not a leader. The leader is Mr. Kaczynski. He chose him, and he created the whole figure. Alice Weidel is also not a leader. She is the forefront of the background of the male heterosexual suit formatted group of politicians that have chosen to show her as a reason to vote for the AfD. So I would rather look among politicians who do have important posts, but they have not achieved this with their own work, but with someone else's decision.
Okay, thank you. Piotr, do you
Maybe
agree?
just a final word
Yes.
of an update, because many things are going on, and maybe it's worth saying a few words about today's developments, because today the Speaker of the Parliament, Szymon Hołownia, who's the leader of one of the coalition's parties, held a press conference just an hour ago, and he said that he would like to. There will be a meeting today of the representatives of the coalition, and Hołownia, who was also the presidential candidate, he said he would seek a renegotiation of the coalition treaty and kind of a complete new opening for the government. He didn't say if this should include also a discussion about the future of Donald Tusk as the prime minister, but I think many things will be on the table. So basically, I think we will have even today a very interesting discussion about the future trajectory of Polish politics. So now this press conference of Hołownia, then I think at 6 there will be the meeting of the leaders of the coalition, and they will discuss about the way forward. And then we will have a speech by the televised speech by Donald Tusk at 8, and he may announce that he will seek vote of confidence. If he doesn't get it, that would mean that he would have to resign within two weeks. But calling this vote of confidence has already met with criticism or rejection by Hołownia, the other leader whom I referred to. He said he don't think this is the right way forward. That shouldn't happen. So we already have Tusk probably putting a lot of pressure on consolidation of the government as it is now under his leadership, and other coalition partners trying to use this moment to renegotiate the whole coalition treaty and find a new equilibrium in this coalition as a response to this electoral failure.
Thank you very much. And Piotr calls this time interesting. We feel for you. Interesting is probably not the only word that comes to mind.
It's a Chinese curse.
Exactly. Thank you very much for sticking with us, for doing this. This was extremely interesting. And let's regroup and maybe review where we are after tonight. Good luck. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dzięki. Cześć. Thank you, Vesela.
Cześć.